All right, so I'm gonna try and make this as quick as possible. I'm not really sure how long the video might be, but the topic of this video is black male privilege, how and why it's a thing. The whole premise of this video is to talk about the fact that we as black men do have a specific thing called black male privilege. And it's different from the regular male privilege. It's actually born from the fact that we have been targeted so much by white supremacy to the point that our presence, pretty much our presence has been overvalued within the confines of the black community, to the point where instances where we probably should have been held accountable, such as maybe for domestic violence or for intercommunal violence, such as maybe shooting at people, shooting shit up, and other such degenerate things. A lot of those, instead of being held accountable how we should, is in being turned into the authorities. We were so overvalued at that point in time that instead of turning us into the cops or whatever, having us be held accountable, we were hidden, we were supported, we were pretty much coddled. And this is pretty much because, after the whole war on drugs thing and all this other stuff, whenever black men were allegedly forced out of the house, as a result, this created a demand for us, I guess, a sort of sympathy for our plight and for being targeted in the black community. And part of this is because, and part of what I'm using to solidify this is the fact that so many of our movements within the confines of the black community have been spearheaded by men, and is being geared primarily towards men and black men and our struggles against white supremacy and racism. I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it, but there are just a couple of instances. It was an article I read sometime last year, and from that point, it was 2 years before I had read the article, 2 to 3 years before I had read that article, about a dude that was 60 plus years old that had sexually assaulted three or four generations of women or females in his family. And the whole point, that's only one instance. I can go a little bit further and go more in depth with some of the articles that I'm referring to. But the point that I'm trying to get to is that many of the predators within the black community, specifically the male predators in our community, have been predators for a long time. They've been hidden, they've been protected. The uncles in the family that, you can't leave your kids around, or the ones that have a thing for like younger women and stuff like that. And notice how we've also had a lot of discourse in the past year, or poignant discourse in the past year over older men going after younger women, and whether or not that's predatory. So keep that in mind as well as I talk about this. The whole point of this is that because of this black male privilege within the confines of the black community, many of us black men that have been doing degenerate things that where we should have been held accountable, we were not held accountable. Now, yes, that's been changing. I'd say more so in the past, maybe 10, 15 years. But for a while, I'd say at least a solid 20 years from our community, due to the rhetoric surrounding feminism and how feminism allegedly made black women want to kick black men out of the house, and the points surrounding the war on drugs and Reaganomics and all that, and crack epidemic, stuff like that, as far as why, a lot of black men were outside of the house. Damn, I lost my train of thought. Pretty much, but since around those times, I say that there's been a elevated value or elevated desire for the black man to stay in the house, which, given the social climate or the racial climate we live in here in America, it makes sense. At least it did at one point in time. There have been plenty of times, like, okay, so if you're aware of the system we live in, you know that there's such thing as male privilege, and it's created because the people that established this country are white and male. So of course, whiteness is included in that, but there's also a privilege associated with being male. And part of this is affirmed through religion, i.e. the Bible, namely Christianity, also through Judaism or the Hebrew Israelite doctrine, which I don't know, maybe you could say those two are kind of different, but whatever. The point is, it's solidified through the economic and social structure, and also through religion. With that being said, of course, that male privilege extends across all demographics in America. Even if you don't necessarily adhere to the religious aspect of it, you may be more cultural in your beliefs. There's still the infrastructure, there's still the setup that you benefit from if and when you interact with society outside of your own, indigenous culture or your own family or whatever you want to call it. So with that being said, black men do most certainly have male privilege first and foremost, along with all the other demographics of men in America. But specifically when it comes to the black community, there is a black male privilege, and it is not present in the Asian community. It's not present in the Hispanic community or the Latino community in America. It's not present in the white community because neither of those groups, especially the two others I mentioned, Hispanic and or Latino and Asian, they haven't had the same degree or the same level of detriment projected onto them because of white supremacy, right? There's been literal litigation created around slavery, and the main slaves at that point in time that were affected were black people. So we have a whole system, as we always say, we have a whole system of oppression that's working against black people first and foremost. And then the further away you get from black skin tone wise, the less oppression that those skin tones are bound to encounter or bound to face because of their proximity or lack of proximity to blackness and their proximity to whiteness. So that being said, there have been plenty of instances we all know and we all have stories in our community and in our families of the uncle or the grandfather or whatever male family member it was that was molesting or raping certain members of our families, mainly the female members. But, of course, it did happen to the male, like the boys and stuff like that. And again, I'll point back to the story that I referred to earlier about this 60-year-old man that was finally held accountable back in like 2018 or 2019 for predating or, essaying three or four generations of women in his own family. And that's important because when you talk about what black male privilege does and what it is the notion of what helps to protect a lot of the black men in our community from being held accountable by the system, because we inherently blame the system, or we inherently acknowledge that the system is biased towards black men. So many of the same things that, black men do, that white men do, the white man doesn't get held accountable as much to the same extent that black men do. And sidebar right here, a lot of times it seems as if we want black men to get a lesser sentence or the least sentence available for doing degenerate things such as SA and other forms of sexual crimes and stuff like that, which I don't agree with. I understand that white men or whatever get off with less time, but that doesn't mean that we just should let these black dudes that do the same thing off with the same amount of time. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't sit up here and say that the system is wrong for letting this white dude off with a little bit of time, but then the moment when the black dude does the same thing and gets a lesser amount of time or gets an easy sentence, all of a sudden the system is right because it didn't slam him the way that it would have in normal circumstances. So yeah, it's not anything. Black male privilege is something that is specific to black men in the black community because these other communities do not have the same history of social and economic oppression as black people do in America. There's not been a whole bunch of legislation that was targeted towards keeping them debilitated. For all intents and purposes, it was mainly targeted at black people because we were here. We were the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, which is what that whole caste system, so to speak. That's really what it's all based upon. That's what it's really here to drive and to enforce. So, and I'm gonna have to make another part to this video. So when you really get down to it, there is a black male privilege, and it's been keeping a lot of black men unnecessarily protected in our community. You also know this is a true fact because of it's acknowledged by black men, but not in the clear terms that I've put forth here. But it's acknowledged by black men, especially when they like to use the terms Pookie and Ray Ray. And they say that, oh, well, these are the types that black women have went after over the past few decades or whatever, because inadvertently they acknowledge the fact that black women have been loyal and have been protective and supportive of these types of men, despite the fact that they're degenerate, despite the fact that they've been destructive in our community. Yeah, I'm gonna have to make a second part of this video. It's gonna come later on. But like the passport bros and all these other black men that think they're better than the quote unquote Pookies and Ray Rays that think they can't do anything wrong because they don't have a criminal record. They understand that that's